The following program is brought to you by Caltech.
It is so great. It is so great to see all of you. It's wonderful. On behalf of the organizers, in particular Donna Fox and Lloyd Watts, who took the bull by the horns and did most of their work in organizing this whole thing, we look forward very much to all this nice stories. Okay? So we'll start with Dick.
All right, I'm tasked with giving some kind of an overview of Carver's career and history and impact, which is a lot to try to put into 15 minutes. So hopefully I've got more pictures than words, and we'll just go through and look at some stuff. Going back a few years, some of this history was filled in for me by Mike Godfrey. He said in 1959, Carver was a new professor and taught Caltech's first course on semiconductor physics, which Mike took. And you know, Shockley's book on the electrons and holes model of semiconductor physics had been out for a few years already, but at that time Caltech didn't really teach that stuff, and I think Carver saw that was a hole, so he filled it by teaching a course on it, and he's kind of been doing that ever since in some ways. In '66, some friends of his in industry, I mention this because Carver's always had a really close collaboration between what he does at Caltech and what's going on in industry, especially in Silicon Valley. They got him some gallium arsenide to play with, and he made a new kind of transistor, the first gallium arsenide MESFET. Published a paper on it with these nice measurements and all this good stuff. And the paper is a really interesting read. I recommend it. And I just quoted a snippet out of it where he talks about the advantages of the device and predicts that it will see increasing applications. And in fact, the whole industry of microwave gallium arsenide transistors was sort of based on this. And so that was pretty prescient back in the 60s. In 1970, he looked at what Gordon Moore had done and decided it needed to be made a law, so he named it Moore's Law. Gordon had drawn this plot that showed transistor density doubling for quite some time, all the way out to 1975, and I think Carver realized, based on some work he did with a grad student around that time, that this would go a lot further than that, and he even you know, figured out that the thing that would limit it would probably be the tunneling through thin gate oxides, and that's pretty much what's limiting things nowadays, I think, although people have found some other clever twists to alleviate that limit to some extent. He also started working on complexity at this time and used computers and calculators to help lay out chips with programmed logic arrays, ways to sort of impose structure on things to make these large numbers of transistors more usable. These top pictures aren't from Carver's course, but I think they kind of represent the sort of the art of slicing and dicing that Carver got students into with his first Caltech course on IC design back in the early 70s. And with his connections in industry, he actually got his friends to fab the student designs so the students would get chips back and test them and have a lot of fun with them. There's this really interesting paper with a lot of quotes from Carver and about how he's teaching the little man to design computers, and this thing about how the scientists and engineers who have an intimate and working knowledge of both computers and microelectronics are the ones that are going to drive the industry forward. And again, that's a pretty prescient point of view, and I think that's kind of the way it happened, mostly because that's the way he taught it and made it happen. He was also teaching not just IC design, but digital design in general with like TTL chips, and students would make projects, and so it was a pretty simple course, and I think it had one rule, which is if it works, you pass, and else not, you know. So that was fun. I got to TA the class after I managed to pass it. In '73, he published a paper on the first overlapping polysilicon gate CCDs. The really cool thing about this paper, you should go back and look it up, is in the margins of the journal, there are these little pictures on the side that actually form an animation. So you do the page flip, and you can watch the potentials going up and down and the charge sloshing from one bucket to another. It's very cool stuff. No puns in this talk, of course. The computer science department was, I think, one of the big things Carver did for Caltech. I think you started the applied physics department before that, too, right? And, yeah, and so a lot of important change at Caltech was brought about through Carver's efforts. The EE department at the time was, they were into a lot of cool things, but the kind of complexity of computation and complexity of design was kind of not really their field, and that was the important thing going on in computer science and IC design. And so with Ivan Sutherland, they focused on that, along with graphics and parallelism and theory that goes with all that stuff. So that was a very exciting time. I was not here at that time, but I was sort of between my various gigs with Carver. I've sort of worked 4 phases of my life with him. But I came to visit one time, and he had Bert Sutherland visiting from Park, and Ivan was here, and they introduced me, and it ended up me getting a job up at Xerox PARC. 25 years after the computer science department was founded, they celebrated with this picture of a chip layout from those days. So you can see how VLSI design was, for a long time, a very important part of the CS concept here. And of course, a lot of cutting up was had at that party. He also started the computation and neural systems option with who, I don't know, Christoph Koch and Hopfield.
Stuff came later.
He came later.
It was John Hopfield and David Van Essen and
yeah,
John Allman.
Right, John Allman, David Van Essen, John Hopfield, yeah. So this was a way for students in different departments and different divisions to do things that were bio-inspired, massively parallel, analog, and so on, working on vision and hearing and learning and all that cool stuff that's still going strong. And Mike Godfrey sent me a snippet that I liked that basically said Carver's role in maintaining the quality of the intellectual and social structure at Caltech is, I think, really important, that Caltech would surely be a poorer place without him. I think you should all bug Mike Godfrey for the specific examples of this, but I believe it's true. Carver's always been really good at connecting undergraduates with research and other cool things like that keep Caltech vibrant. He's done a lot of science over the years, not just teaching and engineering and so on, but you'll hear about some of these topics from some of the other speakers today, so I'm not going to go into them here, but yeah, the next talk I think you'll hear about polywater. I'm going to give Steve's punchline away. No, I'll let him do that. But, there's this early work on biological membranes with these alomethicin voltage-gated channels in black lipid membranes and so on that I think influenced some of the later thinking about bio-inspired electronics, since this basically was a biological electronic device. We got a picture here from tunneling paper and electronic noise paper and so forth. And during all this time, Carver was commuting, I think, since the 60s. I don't know if he smiled as much as these airplanes did, but these, I think we wore out all the PSA jets and they replaced them with US Airways and AirCal and American, and nowadays it's Southwest. But for some of those years, I had the pleasure of riding the planes back and forth with Carver. So there's a lot of stuff that went on up north. A lot of companies, not all in Silicon Valley, but most of these in Silicon Valley, and most of these represented by some of you that are here today. Some consulting gigs, some founding of companies and so forth, all of which was very important stuff. Let's see, I think it was my 4th gig with Carver was when I was working at Foveon, and that was kind of the most fun because we got kind of pretty much full time together for a couple years there and built these cool cameras. I didn't tell you what some of the other gigs were, but here's one. The Xerox PARC collaboration. One of the things he did up in Silicon Valley was to connect the Silicon Structures project with Xerox, and I ran into Doug earlier, told him he's going to have to put up with what I said about him on the slide. Disco Doug Fairburn here with his big hair in the 70s. He looks a little more normal today, but there he is. So we had, like I said, Carver had introduced me to this group, and I got the job up there. And he had a number of other students here and other Caltech students. I don't know if these were all Carver students or some were Ivan students or whatever, but we had Jim Rowson, Steve Trimberger, Jim Macbeth, Dave Johansson. Dave's here speaking today. And I don't know how much any of you remember about the 70s, but if you can imagine what it would be like to have an interactive IC design editor with a mouse running on a personal computer in the 70s, this was pure heaven. This was amazing. This was unheard of. And we got to design chips there in a really cool way, thanks to these Caltechers that wrote the software and helped us figure out how to design chips. One of the results of this collaboration was the book, the Mead and Conway book, that took the whole, this whole body of knowledge sort of worldwide and translated into multiple languages and courses at lots of universities and so forth. So this was a great explosion of knowledge that really influenced the world. Lots of later books. Well, the big ones from Carver were the ones where he's the single author on them, or the analog VLSI book and the collective electrodynamics books. Fascinating, and I was really happy over the years to be able to help Carver a little bit with each of these books, and a lot of other people here helped as well. Carver's achievements have been recognized in various places, like by President Bush with the National Medal of Technology in 2002. Here at Caltech, the Distinguished Alumni Award a few years ago. And then this year, at the Distinguished Alumni Awards, Carver got to give the keynote address, which was really fascinating. I was happy to be able to be there for that one. He's also got some interesting hobbies. So Carver likes, for some reason, having grown up at a power plant, perhaps, he's fascinated by power generation and transmission. So he's been out doing things like he got Southern California Edison to donate this kind of decommissioned Pelton wheel-based hydroelectric generator. And he donated it to a museum up in the mountains east of Fresno, where they've got it installed and working, and they can show you how to turn it on and off and ramp up the power and do a cold start and all these other cool things. And you can read about it online, but it's probably better to actually go there. I haven't done that yet, but I want to do that. And he's gone out and hiked power lines looking for the archaeology of how they used to work, and studied the records and dug up the artifacts and displayed them at trade shows and so on. I don't know how many of you know, I collect slide reels, and we have shows and slide reel collectors get together and show their stuff. Well, Carver's into insulators, and would you believe it, there's like a national convention of insulator collectors and historians. So Carver and Barbara go out on these road trips and follow these old power lines that they've studied and try to figure out how they worked and and they've written some great articles on this stuff. It's all online. 75 kilovolts was a new record high voltage and record long line back in 1907. So basic summary of here is that Carver, I think, embodies and continues to preach what Feynman said about ways of thinking, that the real glory of science is when we can find a way of thinking such that the law is evident. One example of that was Moore's law. Once you plot the thing on a semi-log plot, the law is pretty evident, and might as well name it, call it a law. But he's been doing the same thing with electrodynamics and gravity and so forth, and we're going to hear a little bit about that from some of the other talkers here. So that's a topic of which we are quadruple or quadrupole excited because I've gotten a preview at some of what he's working on, and it's really fascinating. Carver bases this work on Mach's principle, which says that the inertia of every element of matter is due to its interaction with all the other elements of matter in the universe. And it's kind of obvious that it couldn't possibly be any other way. It was obvious to Ernst Mach way back when. But the nature of the interaction and formulating the wave equations that make it work is what Carver's been up to on that. So I think I stuck under my 15 minutes. Carver, Sky Mall. says that this thing came from Caltech too. This is some amorphous metal alloy technology that seemed like it would be an appropriate thing to bring out here. What better birthday present for Carver than one of these, you know?
Got to turn on the sound. Wow. What Dick didn't mention that should be mentioned is I spent about the first 10 years of my career working with a guy by the name of Bill Spitzer, doing measurements of metal semiconductor barriers and so forth. And it was out of that work that the work on the MESFET transistor came. Unfortunately, Bill's not with us anymore, but he was a wonderful mentor to me. He was came out here from Bell Labs and was senior Bell Labs researcher, so he knew all the drill, you know, like, for example, how to get your stuff published, and which I didn't know from straight up. And so he was a wonderful partner for probably 5 years, and that's all disappeared from this this work. But we had an enormously productive time together, and I miss Bill a lot. There was one slide that I wanted to say some. Oh, I know what it was. Marina is here. Those cartoons were a Kwang Yu, and he used to, every time something would happen, like that one was from a party a lot like the one that Toby's putting on tonight, and I cut up the watermelon. I mean, they needed a carver, so what do you do? And so, and the net result was that he would come out with a cartoon like that. And we tried to get in touch with Kwang Yi to see if we could get him here today, but that didn't work. But he's a great guy and absolutely wonderful member of the early computer science. And Marina came in a second year, maybe?
78.
78, yeah. And Dave Johansson was here before then, and Phil Netches was here before then, and Telly was here before then, and we'll hear from them too. So.